Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Voice of ERP, sponsored by ISM New Jersey. And I would like to, at this time, turn it over to our host for the show, who is Sam Gupta. He is with ElevatIQ and the host of WBSRocks. At this time, I'd like to turn the program over to Sam, who's going to take it away with Brian.
Thank you so much, Kathy, for allowing me to host this program. Welcome, everybody, to today's show. And this is our Voice of ERP series, for which we meet every month on second Thursday. So we have a lot of different exciting guests lined up. Just a little intro about myself. I am Sam Gupta, your host and principal at ElevatIQ. ElevatIQ is the independent ERP and digital transformation consulting firm. We help our clients with ERP selection, implementation. And for today, we have an incredible guest in the ERP community. And if you're not familiar with him, you should definitely follow him. His name is Brian Sommer. So I'll invite Brian. Brian, hello, welcome to the show.
Well, glad to be here, Sam. Should be an interesting conversation. I'm not quite sure what you're going to ask me, but I'm sure I'll have something pithy to say about it. So yeah, thanks for having me.
ERP conversations are always fun, and we have had a lot of different conversations. And Brian, it's always very fun to speak with you because you go through a lot of different selection and implementation engagements, and they could be roller coaster in general. So we'll start with you, but audience, if you're joining for the first time, make sure you guys ask a lot of questions. I don't have any questions to ask, okay? And I'm typically very lazy in general. So if you ask questions, that is going to make my life easier. So Brian, I am going to start with a little bit more introduction about you in terms of what you do. And you have a little non-traditional background as well in the ERP community, from your corporate career to now writing for Diginomica. So that's always exciting how you got into that. So do you want to describe your career journey a little bit?
Well, let's put it this way. I did almost 20 years with Accenture, and 10 of those I ran its software intelligence unit, and that gave me an incredible opportunity to really see the whole world around big package software. But since then, I did a startup briefly. I've been doing a lot of continue to do an awful lot of software selection, software negotiation, other kind of projects for clients. And I'm one of those very few, what you call a buy-side analyst in the software industry. I get my income from helping clients, not selling subscriptions and quadrants and waves and trapezoids and whatever else somebody's peddling these days. And that's what helps kind of inform my point of view and what's going on, I guess, out there in the market. Anyway, from that, I've also ended up hiring and using people on projects to implement all kinds of package software, whether it's ERP, payroll, supply chain, what have you. And if you want, we could talk a little bit about what is it that really makes a great person in the, in this kind of space, if you want to hire somebody or build a career in it, what do you want to look for? I'd be happy to talk about that if you want to go there.
Yeah, let's do that. In fact, we have a lot of procurement professionals as part of the audience, and they are always looking to see. So from the procurement perspective, it's going to be a very different experience because they are going to be invited on the ERP table. Sometimes they are going to be, confused in terms of how to champion any sort of ERP initiatives or whatever they might be trying to do from the transformation perspective. So how to build a career for them, and obviously how to hire, that could be a great addition as well.
So I think the first question your audience really needs to take to heart is, are you looking for a job or are you looking for a career? And the two are very different.
Exactly.
And it's a shame because a lot of times some of the people I talk with, they tell me that they define their job as like, I am an expert in, I don't know, Coupa, for example.
Yeah.
And I go, really? Well, then I want to press them a little bit about what that is. And then what I find out is they're not really an expert and they just want a job. They just want to be part of some chargeable effort, if you will, or they want to be associated with something. One of the worst things I can see in a resume is when somebody says that they participated, that's the key word, they participated in like a payables or procurement or payroll, whatever systems project. You know what that means? That means they could have been the person who just went around once every 2 weeks and collected timesheets and put it together as part of a program management spreadsheet. They don't know anything about the function. They don't know anything about the technology, but yet they somehow want to get credit for that. Those are people who either are not right for this or certainly not trying to build a career. Now, you want to build a career in this. I'll give you some lessons learned here. You really need to understand the entirety of the process. That's the first thing. You've got to get your head around everything from when somebody has a germ of an idea that their company may want to buy something, how that's going to manifest itself. And not just anything, it's all the kinds of things they buy, whether it's from, it's off the shelf kind of stuff, spare MRO kind of things, or it's some unique, highly engineered kind of thing. You got to understand the entire process flow. And then you have to understand all the little connection threads on, well, we probably need to have it integrated back into budgeting and planning because we've got to plan for this cost. We got to make sure it's somewhere in the financials. Then as the costs come through, you want to make sure that you've been able to figure out how we're going to receive this material and how it's going to end up in the accounting system and everything else from there. I could go on and on, but the point being, it's an understanding the totality of that. So if you want to, where I'm going with this is, if you want to have a career, then you need to become an expert. You just can't be some generalist who kind of has a sort of vague possible kind of feel for this. You got to bring something, because when I'm looking at like a person's resume and they want to be, I'm thinking about bringing them on one of my projects. I'm looking for someone who can walk in the door and do a couple of things for my client that deliver instant value. They can tell me exactly where there are problems with a package. They know that there are common process things that, to use a Texas phrase, there's wanting and getting are two different things. And while the client might want something in their procurement solution, what they're going to get, it could be something very different because that's the way a package was built instead. But what you want is someone to be that expert who knows exactly what you can and can't get away with using a given product. They know where the quicksand is and where you don't want to go and how you avoid making a big mistake on this deal. And that's really the great thing about an expert. When I staff projects, I learned a lesson early in my career from a really good colleague, and he said he always wants to put the following people on a project. He wants a manager who's done 4 or 5, call them procurement projects, but it doesn't really matter what the vendor product was. It's just that they've done it. They know the function, they know the political issues, the training challenges. They've seen enough of these and enough varieties, enough companies where they got the big picture. Then they want usually 2 really deep experts on that technology, because they're the ones who spare them from going over budget in a bunch of areas by going down rat holes that aren't going to be productive. And they know where those problem and pain points are, and it's all about risk avoidance. They're the smart product experts. Then you've got some junior people that they took some basic training, they've got some accreditation kind of certificates, and they're going to be on the project, but they're still building expertise. They're not at the expert level yet. Now, anyway, go ahead. So
no, go ahead.
It looks like you want to bug me now.
Please, no, please go ahead.
So on the flip side, I remember in 2007, I saw a job posting where somebody was looking for some Workday people on a project. And a resume came across my desk of a guy who claimed to have 15 years experience working on Workday software. Now, mind you, the company, Workday, only been formed in 2005. So the company was only 2 years old, and this clown was claiming to have 15 years of experience.
Oh boy.
That's not an expert. That's an invitation for a criminal fraud investigation when you're trying to pull that kind of a lie off. Anyhow, I'm also telling you that think about your resume as something that's going to be, you need to think of it the way an accountant looks at a balance sheet. And you want to have skills, and the top level is like what you know about procurement or ERP or what have you. And you want to be able to put line items under there that show all the different things you did to constantly keep upgrading, expanding, and keeping current that skill set, because your skills, particularly when they're tied to a technology, depreciate rapidly over time because the technology keeps changing, morphing, what have you. So if your biggest asset is what you know about a given technology, then you need to be thinking about, what am I doing around this? So here's a couple of things. I do believe that anytime you get a chance, any opportunity, whether it's through a client or through your own employer, to get to go to a software vendor's user conference, go. Even if it's a regional event, go. Because one of the things that builds your resume is the fact that you now know and will meet people at other companies, and they can share tips and tricks and everything else. You'll also get to meet vendor people that you can call and follow up with. That's added value that you bring to your employer or to your clients. No question about that. But I would have staff in my lifetime. I've had staff people come and go, well, Brian, I'd really like to go to vendor X's user conference. And I'd go, why? And well, I just thought it'd be kind of fun. Now, if your reason for going to the event is that it's in Vegas and you intend to turn it into a week-long vacation at the company's nickel, and you're not going to learn anything from it, you're not getting the invitation. You're not going to go. In fact, I would tell people, like, I'll let you go to one right off the bat early in your career, but starting on either the second or third trip, you better be prepared to be speaking at that conference, not being just an attendee. And you can't be a speaker unless you have some depth of expertise. You know something and you can share it and demonstrate it. And when you're done, your goal is that when you come off the stage, there ought to be a whole bunch of people pushing their business cards. I know that's kind of an old school kind of thing nowadays, but metaphorically giving you their business card, going, I want to stay in touch with you. I want to talk to you, or I want to hire you. I want to whatever. That's your goal and objective, because that's how you know you're delivering expertise. It's not until you've been an expert in the space for 5, 8, 10 years. That's when you get to give a different kind of talk, where you're talking about more general trends. The worst thing I've ever seen, though, is I actually saw a very senior person in a major consulting firm get up at a user conference to give a talk. And this was just in the weeks before we went through all the pandemic shutdown. And this guy was standing there all excited because he just heard about this thing called the cloud. And I'm like, oh my God, this guy, this was just 3 years ago. And this guy's thinking like he just discovered something. He thought he was like Columbus tripping over into the new world, And he looked like a freaking idiot because A, he's never been an expert, and B, he thought that the audience needed to hear that, and they don't. What they really want to know are the big macro trends that affect lots of these companies, and you can't know what that is until you've been out there and played with all kinds of different companies to build that kind of expertise and knowledge base up. Those are some thoughts. Anyway, the bottom line, guys, if you've never seen this article years ago in Fast Company magazine, the cover story was written by Tom Peters, the management consultant, and it was called The Brand Called You. And it is a fascinating article. And it's really, if you're serious about a career in procurement software, what have you, or ERP software, read that article. And that's the thing that will guide you as to how you want to build a career and build it around something. And you could take this same advice and you could build it around other things, other kinds of software, certainly, but it could be in any number of other dimensions. What you want to become is you want to become that real expert that people naturally just flock and gravitate towards, because if you do that, you're never going to be having to worry about filling up your backlog of work to do. People will seek you out and call you all the time. And that's so much more cost effective and more timely for you, because you don't spend time wasting trying to sell yourself to others when your expertise will do all the talking for you.
Yeah, could not agree more. The brand called you. And in fact, when I look at different ERP consultants, pretty much everybody is ERP consultant these days, to be honest, okay?
Oh.
And you are hitting on very important layer there. So you mentioned the practitioner, the user, and the implementation. These three are very different things. Just because you have used a software, that does not make you an ERP consultant. Typically, you need to go through a lot of different cycles to be able to understand how the ERP implementations are done. So I don't know if you want to touch a little bit on that, because obviously in the procurement community, that's going to be a misunderstanding, because a lot of procurement professionals, they are going to be using the software, but they don't necessarily understand whether, what is required to be an ERP consultant. That's a different ballgame deal together.
Well, I think to some extent, even the users, certainly project sponsors and of these kind of initiatives for these technologies that procurement people use, they have a responsibility to understand what is the art of the possible. What is it that you could do with this technology? Because if you don't do that, I don't know how you're going to come up with a great way of running a process if you don't know what the boundaries or what the opportunities are for you for this kind of technology. You're right, though, that a lot of the users aren't going to necessarily go this way. But it's kind of funny. I've watched the careers of some people that I know very well, and it's fascinating to me. What gets them calls from headhunters is the fact that it's like, hey, we noticed somehow, they see it on your social media profile, whatever, that you use something. It could be, I don't know, SAP or whatever. And they see that, and that's what triggers the initial call. It's good for your career to be able to know that you're not just a user, you're a user who happens to have some technical savvy around these kind of products that are out there. And the more different products that you have exposure to, the more informed, the more well-rounded you are when it comes to being able to improve your marketability out there. So anyway, yes, there are definitely distinctions between the user and the implementer, what have you. And some of the implementers, again, there was an old adage that said, those who can't do, those who can't teach. And I would argue, and those who can't teach or do become consultants. And some of those are really bad consultants out there. There are some downright brilliant, and I've had a pleasure of working with a few of them, but you got to pick them carefully.
Yeah, I could not agree more. And, when we look at the consulting profession, I guess, you spent probably your life there. And the only thing most people look at is, okay, the dollar sign, that consultants make a lot of money. But in general, to be a consultant, in my experience, is extremely hard, because you are supposed to be hitting the ground running from day one. And unless you have done the same job 5,000 times, it's going to be really hard for you to be able to, do that, because that's the expectation when you are going for any sort of product or engagement. So in your experience, let's say if somebody is trying to become the ERP consultant, how many projects should they go through before they can call themselves ERP consultant?
Frankly, I'm not going to answer it in a number directly, and I'll tell you why. I know in my career, I started off, I did 15 different projects in the first 2 years.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
But the reality is, I got a lot of exposure around a product at 15 different clients, but I didn't spend a whole lot of time in any one of them. So let's say I was a product expert is what I was.
Yeah.
Did I really fully understand all of the change management issues? No. Did I understand how you sold or delivered one of those projects terribly? No. What it was, I was this like gunslinger that was brought in there to, immediately identify, and like with the path of a bullet flying through the air, just to go the shortest path to find the problem and get it fixed and then get on and move to the next one. So I had expertise, but it was very narrow. It wasn't where it ought to be. I would argue, and I've also known some folks who worked at, say, one company, one client, one project for like 3, 4, 5 years. And I'm sorry, folks, but I think there's a diminishing benefits curve that if you stay at one place too long, then you won't necessarily develop the kind of expertise that may be the best for your career, possibly, that you should see other products. You should see how other companies do things. Now, if you're brand new, like right out of high school, college, whatever, it's not a problem to check out a couple of different, outfits, or do like I did, take a career in consulting where you're going to always see a lot of different clients. And that's how you really begin to, it's through all those new perspectives and these different lenses that you see things, that you see more of the big picture, and you understand the challenges that are going to be required in there. Believe it or not, what a lot of people don't understand about, and we'll go back to ERP for a second, is that ERP projects are financial.
Yeah.
They are political. They are personal. They are technical.
Yeah.
I wrote about this in a book I did, and I think had 9 or 11 of these terms. And, it's functional, technical, political, economic. Anyway.
Emotional.
Emotional. Yes.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Trust me. I saw a client executive director jump out of his chair and was screaming at the CEO of a software company on the, the speakerphone there in his office. Yeah, you can get real emotional about those when things aren't going right. But anyway, my point is, these are multi-dimensional kinds of animals, and how you can claim to be an expert if you only know one little bit of it, which may be just the technical stuff or just the functional piece, you're not quite at expert level yet, in my opinion. So it'll take you a few years, frankly. And even after a few years, you're what I would call, you're good, but you're not at the best level yet.
Yeah, could not agree more. So I think you are getting a little plug here. I don't know, it is your book or somebody else's book, but I think Kathy wants to know the name of the book that you referenced.
That was Digital with Impact. I was talking about all these digital transformation kind of projects, and it was either in that one or one I did called it was The Right Selection, but it was one of those. I'm pretty sure it was Digital with Impact. But anyway, I didn't come on here to plug a book, so let me be real clear about that, Sam. I just remember that I remember taking time writing that putting together all the different kinds of components that go in there, and they're not, there's a whole lot more than just functionality and technical prowess. There's a lot more to these things.
But I'll tell you one thing, audience, if I know anything about Brian, he's going to be super, super, super conservative with everything, okay? So even if you are getting plucked from Brian, that's probably going to be the best recommendation that you are ever going to get. So I would recommend check the book out. On that note, I am actually going to touch on your comment, Brian, in going different persona of the consultants. Also, when people think of the ERP term, okay? That is, I'm not too sure if ERP really means anything, especially in these days, okay? Because every single software out there is probably referenced as ERP. So when you talk about, the category of software, for example, you mentioned P2P, HCM, ERP. These systems serve very different purpose overall. Yeah. Okay, just because you know P2P does not mean you are not necessarily ERP expert. or ACM. So what do you think about that?
Well, it's funny. What you don't know about me, or few people know, is I actually do a bunch of expert witness work in some honking huge litigation and even antitrust matters. And invariably, there's something about attorneys. They all want me to define ERP as part of, the case. And I've pulled together, I've found dozens and dozens of other people's definitions, because you need to reference those kind of things in an expert report. And you're right, it's a term that everybody kind of nods along with, and I don't think there's a single definition that really applies. I mean, we all know it's supposed to be about enterprise resource planning, but the components of it, financials, HR, supply chain, there's all of the customer service CX kind of things. There's the procurement, and if it wasn't part of the supply chain piece, it was there's obviously manufacturing, all the MRP kind of things. There's distribution, supply chain, transportation management. I could go on and on and on.
Yeah.
The bottom line is, it's it really is, at best, it's a concept. It's not really a hard and fast definition. It's a concept where you want to try and possibly buy and implement a fully integrated set of applications that optimize the performance of your business. That's really about it. As a term goes, it's like this, Sam. Every fast food restaurant out there claims to offer you quality, value, and service. And do those words mean anything when you've been to some of these dump piles? It's one thing to say the words, it's another thing to actually live them. So I don't know what we're going to get really from ERP, having a taxonomy discussion on that 3-letter acronym. I think we're probably better off moving to a new subject, because that's just not going to create any great insights for anybody on today's broadcast.
But there are a lot of nuggets I'm pretty sure audience is drawing from. But we also want to discuss the contracts, and you do a lot of work there as well, right? So let's say if you were to take out 5 different mistakes that you are seeing in the way the software contracts are structured, especially for the procurement people, it's going to be really handy because they are the ones who are typically running the procurement process. So let's say if they review the contract, what are some of the mistakes that you typically see in those?
Well, I'm going to make this even more fun. Let me tell you about some of the things that procurement people really need to be focusing in on these contracts that are very timely today. One of them has to do with, I would say, it has to do with all the indemnification that's required to protect. You wanted to protect your firm in case the cloud vendor inadvertently gets hacked or what have you. What happens to your data? Because there's a lot of stuff in there about your customers, how much you're buying. Your suppliers, how much you're buying from them. What exactly is it you're buying, which could give somebody some really good insights into some proprietary, whether it's formulas, mixtures, whatever your parts, components that go into your stuff. What I often find is the vendors want you to indemnify them against any losses, but it doesn't go the other way around. And you'll want to make sure that those contracts really focus in on where the limits of indemnification are really going to be and how that's going to work. Another area I think that's important to look at has to do with backups of data. And a lot of the cloud vendors do, I think, an abysmal job of letting customers back information off of their system and retain a copy for themselves. And the reason for that is most of them only let you pull off your transactions, not the contents of databases. They don't even let you know what the database schema looks like. So you can't make image copies of their databases so that you can hang on to those in a database format. No, what you get is basically a giant CSV file, like a spreadsheet file that has every transaction that's ever been run through their software since the beginning of time. It's not really a backup. It's just a flat file that could be used to reprocess the software, the data through the same software again. These are just 2 areas I think that procurement people would have a ton of fun just probing around on contracts. The other thing I would recommend you look at is when your SaaS contract comes to the end of its term, what you should have done is negotiated like a 3-year, one or two person access to the software in those remaining years, after the main contract lapses, so that like an external auditor or regulator could access the data and see it in context in the software, so they understand what was there and maybe produce and run reports. But it's just a single user having, or two users max, having access to the information for like 3 or 5 years, whatever, after the contract lapses. And I've beat up a couple of ERP vendors frequently enough on that one point alone that it's now part of their standard contract. They'll actually do that, but it's the exception rather than the rule right now in the market. Those are just some ideas.
So some very interesting insights there. So I definitely want to touch a little bit more on that if you're comfortable with that. So let's say if I go for any of the mainstream vendors, each of them are probably going to have different clauses in terms of what you can get from your data perspective. So you mentioned that it's probably going to be a flat file. And I don't know how that flat file works, because let's say if I have millions and millions of transactions, I don't know if CSV can even scale that kind of volume. So I don't know what you are going to get in your CSV file. That is number one. And you also mentioned that the flat file is probably not going to be any use anyways. The only thing you can do is you have to buy the software, and you can probably re-import that data in that software. So I don't know if there is a real use of that. So why do we need to pay attention to the contract again if there is no real use of the file?
Okay, so you're right that vendors will tell you that they have all kinds of recovery capabilities in case somebody, like their data center goes down. But let's say after a few years, you don't care for your vendor that much anymore. Maybe you're thinking of going somewhere else, or your auditors are bugging you because in your industry, they're very concerned about maybe your data getting destroyed or messed up by some sort of international hacker or whatever that wants to take it down. You want control of your information. You want to know what you have. Now, the way you have that in your company today, it's in a relational database in all likelihood. And you know the database schema, you know how to access it, you can run reports against it. And more importantly, it's already been validated. So we know it met all the rules that were in effect at the time it was processed and put on the databases. Now, a lot of cloud vendors don't give you access to their databases directly or to their schemas, so you don't know how they store data in their databases. It's just unknown to you. You also don't have all of their validation logic. So the fact that they can give you back basically like an input file for data that went in doesn't help you a whole lot, because you don't know where the data would go. You just have this big flat file, and you're correct. Just having that file is not helpful. So how could you, you wouldn't even be able to necessarily rerun that information into another vendor's product if you want to do a conversion. You're kind of screwed. You don't, in the old days, you had a perpetual license on software, so you could keep your old software and old data on your machine, just nobody's using it hardly ever, but it was there and it worked. Now, what are you going to do? Like you said, if you got a 60 million line CSV file, what good is it? Who's got all week to wait for Lotus or Excel to open up and try and process that? It can't be done. So it's not a viable restart and recovery deal. It's not a good way to transport and move information to a potentially new system. So, the archival is the issue. Is, can I archive the information? Can I get access to it? And can I bring it back into my own company, have it available for perpetuity? The answer is, in most cases, really no.
Very interesting. So now let's go back to the second recommendation that you had, and that was about keeping some of the users, afterwards in the contract. And I will tell you some stories from my experience, how the experience goes, especially when you are going to be moving from any of these ERP vendors. Okay, it's not going to be fun. I promise this. So in some cases, what happens as soon as they know you are moving from their software, moving out, then obviously it's not going to be well received because they are going to try you to keep in their software, but that's probably not going to happen because you have decided that you are moving to a new one. So now you are saying that the contract should have provision that you should have at least 2 or 3 users that you can keep at least for a year or 2. I don't know what is the recommended timeline there, but you want to keep that. In my case, when I had this story, a customer, they were working with, let's say, a tier 5 vendor, and they just stopped picking the calls from the customer. Okay. So I don't know if there is any sort of legal obligation that they should be picking the call or they should be selling to users, because, vendors are not necessarily obligated once they feel that, it's not going to be enough ROI for them.
No, they're not. They're not going to feel any great obligation, but more importantly, they'll be licking their chops if you have to come back to them, a year or 2 after you drop the service. And they go, yeah, well, we could reload it for you, but you're going to have to pay like 2 years of back subscriptions and a whole bunch of other fees. You don't want to be in that boat. When you buy big ticket software, it's not enough to go down the wedding aisle with the vendor. You already should have had the prenup ready for when you do have a divorce. Every SaaS deal, you have to have a prenup, okay? And you have to cover what happens, who gets custody of the dog and the house and the kids and everything else at the end of the contract. And that's the time to negotiate and have this conversation, is at the beginning, before you actually sign the deal. And if a vendor's not going to give you that, you probably don't want that vendor. You want somebody who is not holding you over a barrel, but is actually working with you in a partnerial way. And if you do have to change, and I'm going to tell you right now, nobody really wants to change their ERP vendor because it's so expensive and so risky.
Yeah.
And none of them want to be on the cover of Business Week magazine saying why Sam Gupta can't make payroll this year because his payroll system's crapped out, and you don't want to be there and they don't want to be there. So everybody tries to avoid that. That's a last ditch deal. But there are some situations, particularly if you had a starter ERP as a small business, and you moved to you grew up and became a mid-sized company. You had a new ERP for that, and then you moved to the big leagues, become some giant intergalactic, Sam Gupta global intergalactic, genius company, whatever. Well, then you need another system, and it's okay if you outgrew something. Vendors understand that, but you need to have that. You need that safety net there where you can still access your data in context, in the way it would be used in that software today. You want to be able to have that access, because I guarantee you, a regulator, it could be the labor department in your state, wants to come in and see, how did you calculate overtime for your employees? Were you in violation of some labor law? Well, if you have it all on a flat file, a CSV file, you're screwed. You might as well just start writing a check to that state labor department, because you're not going to prevail. You have no way to win that, but you can if you can have access to it. So plan for that before you do the deal with a vendor.
Okay, very interesting. I have one more story related to your comment overall from the support perspective and the way people think about customization. In this particular case, mid-size distributor, they thought, we can figure out ERP system. They are not supposed to be as hard. Why do we need to work with the consultants? Okay, so what they did is they were on-prem, one of the mainstream software, pulled off support, never paid to the vendor. Obviously, they stopped supporting. They created a little database here, and whatever they need to do, they started doing from that. Now they started running into challenges, because obviously one of these days, things are going to break if your software is not being updated. So now they go back to the vendor, and vendor is going to say the same thing. Okay, since you did not pay for the support, now I'm actually going to do 2x or maybe 3x, 5x, whatever I need to do.
So let's extend this thought out a little bit more for your supply chain procurement people. A lot of your documents that you trade back and forth with your buying partners include engineering drawings, could be photographs, it could be scanned images of, let's say, a receiving document. There could be all kinds of images. There may even be voice files of telephone recordings or Zoom recordings, whatever. If any of these scanned images are part of like a cloud ERP system, and you're going to change ERP vendors, how do you back up, recover, and hang on to those kinds of files? Those are not transactions. They're not transaction databases. These are everything from GIFs and TIFFs and JPEGs and MPEGs and all this other stuff. And they need to be specifically attributed to a given transaction. And there's a linkage between the image and like a transaction. And how do you do that if you don't have access to their databases, their pointers, and everything else? And they're not going to give you a printout of all of your images, but so this is why you need to think about the world's changing. We're not just a static printed document or a one line item kind of transaction after another world anymore. We're dealing in multiple kinds of media, and we have to rethink, what does backup, recovery, restart, what does how do I deal with an audit, whatever, when I have all these other kinds of types of information, and what are we going to do about it? And the last thing is, now we're also using big data to plan for things like future orders that we want to place with suppliers. Well, are you going to back up some of these huge big data databases, and what if you don't own those databases? What if you're buying access into them from some third party? So I just think there's a whole host of other things we need to think about if we want to be an expert in supply chain technology today.
Yeah, so very interesting. So we can probably do one more story in this particular case. Let's say you have the ERP system, and there are going to be ERP systems that overcommit their capabilities. Okay, so they are going to say, you know what, can you do manufacturing? Sure, I could do that. Okay, when you look at the ERP system, how they are doing manufacturing, they are going to have, let's say, the BOM as the attachment. Okay, so they can probably do the accounting, but they are not necessarily the manufacturing ERP system, but they are selling themselves as the manufacturing ERP system. So now going back to your comment related to, you are going to get the transactions as part of your history, but then you are not going to get the images, right?
Correct.
So you basically lose your BOM and the item.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah, you'd be astonished at how little people realize about how much information they're not going to have access to going forward, and they didn't plan for that when they were contracting to get the technology in the first place. Just the simple fact, I'm surprised at how many companies, they'll have like 3- and 4-way matching, and there will be receiving reports, invoices, shipping manifests, freight bills, all that kind of stuff associated with the receipt of an order. And in the new software, all that stuff is usually scanned and or sent electronically, and it's pointed to or attached to an invoice, and it'll work its way through financials. And you're absolutely right, Sam. The financial system, you might be able to get a backup of the financial transactions, but all of those supporting images that are specifically tied to a given transaction, they could be lost forever. And how do you defend an audit if you can't produce even the image of like one of these documents? How do you know that this supplier was actually shipped you stuff, because you no longer have the receiving report? You can't show that it actually arrived anywhere. So yes, people haven't been thinking about this stuff, and it needs to be very well thought through.
Yeah, could not agree more. So great insights. We are close to our time now. Let's say if people need to find you, what is the best way, Brian?
Can you say that again? My phone kind of cut
Yeah,
out.
let's say, do you want to provide your company name or however they want to find you? If they have any follow-up questions, I guess.
Yeah, well, tons of people will reach out to me through email, LinkedIn, whatever. The company I have is called TechVentive, but most people just send me an email, brian@techventive.com or vitalanalysis.com. I would say I'll answer your call right away, but there's a good chance I'm in a 737 somewhere, and I may need a few hours before I get caught up on my voicemail. So anyway, that's the best way to do that, or an email. Yeah.
All right, amazing. Thank you so much, Brian, for your time. Really appreciate you. And guys, if you're not following Brian, make sure you guys give him a follow on LinkedIn. On social media, he is super active there. On that note, thank you so much for joining today. We'll meet again for the series in the month of January, and we are going to have Lisa Pope from Apicor. So that's going to be a very interesting discussion. So don't miss that. On that note, happy holidays, and that's it. Kathy, do you have any final words before we close?
No, I would just like to say thank you for that. Was a fantastic conversation. I learned so much. And Brian, we always want to publicize books that our speakers have published, written or co-authored. Definitely always want to put that out there for the audience, because they would be interested in the topic and they really would like to get a hold of the information. So thank you again. They want to know, how are you listed on LinkedIn, Brian?
I think on LinkedIn I'm at Brian S. Sommer, or excuse me, that's Twitter, at Brian S. Sommer, and I think it's the same, Brian S. Sommer, on LinkedIn as well.
I'll drop the URL.
I apologize. I didn't have all that ready. I could have had a whole slide full of connection deals, but by all means, just send me an email, brian@vitalanalysis.com. And truthfully, I'm very good about responding to emails and phone calls, so have no fear. And like I said, guys, I'm the kind of fellow that old school kind of business manners. If I don't get you, it's like I said, it's because I'm flying somewhere on a stage, but I will respond, and no matter how silly or interesting the request might be. In fact, I kind of enjoy the silly ones more than anything else. Anyway, thank you. Thanks for having me, Sam.
Oh,
thanks, guys.
Thank you. And don't worry, we're going to be sending out your email, and I'll also do the LinkedIn for those that want to connect with you on LinkedIn as well.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Well, thanks everybody. We hope everybody has a great rest of the week. And as Sam said, our next show is January 12th. So have a great day, everybody.
Thanks, Kathy.
Thanks.